Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. So today we're unpacking a fascinating piece of source material that completely reframes a deeply personal practice for a lot of people: prayer. I mean, have you ever gone into a prayer just expecting to rattle off a checklist to God, but then you leave feeling like something fundamental inside you had completely shifted? Well, the source we're looking at today breaks down the really profound transformation that happens when we finally move past that routine transactional checklist and actually step into true spiritual intimacy.
Okay, let's just dive right into this. What if deep prayer is far more than just presenting requests? So often we treat prayer as this one-way street, right? Like a cosmic drive-through where we just drop off our wish lists or hit the panic button for our emergency requests. But the author of our source text challenges this preconceived notion head-on. They ask, what if prayer is actually a doorway into a level of intimacy that most people are completely missing out on? To really understand this, the author breaks down their own personal experience, which honestly started out just like any ordinary day.
So, they kick things off at what they call the starting line, exploring the heavy burden of our routine prayers.
Like so many of us, the author entered prayer carrying just a heavy, chaotic load. Think about how we usually do this. You rush in, you've got all these burdens, questions, concerns, responsibilities. You want things fixed, explained, or changed, and you want it done right now. It's hurried, it's frantic, the speaking is rapid fire. It's this chaotic, ordinary approach to prayer that, honestly, sometimes just feels like another exhausting task on your to-do list. To really grasp this, we have to look at the contrast. Ordinary prayer is highly transactional. It's all about speaking, asking, explaining, and rushing. But deep prayer, it's completely different. It's relational. It involves listening, lingering, stillness, and actually experiencing. The fundamental difference here is moving from treating God like a giant vending machine to treating Him as a presence to be experienced.
And look, a huge barrier to this deeper experience is what the text calls the noise we carry. We're not just talking about physical noise, like the dog barking or traffic outside. It's this heavy mental noise, emotional noise, and a relentless nonstop stream of worries pulling our attention in a million different directions. When we first step into our prayer closets, all these thoughts, they just follow us right in. Our minds wander, our attention shifts, and we struggle to maintain literally any sort of focus.
Which brings us to a massive pivot point in the process: lingering in the presence.
This is where we actually have to hit the brakes and dramatically slow down our pace. Instead of rushing through the prayer like normal, the author made an active, intentional choice to just stay. When the speaking stopped, they didn't just hang up the phone and run off to the next task. They chose to linger. And this pivot follows a very distinct chronological journey. Step 1 is pouring out your heart. That's the normal start. But then, critically, comes step 2, lingering in the presence. You stay. You wait. And because you linger, you finally reach step 3, experiencing transformation. The source material really emphasizes that the deeper you go into that lingering phase, the more you realize something entirely unexpected is happening inside you.
And when you do that, you hit this mental shift where the noise finally fades and your perspective completely changes. As the author continued to linger, that heavy mental noise we were just talking about actually began to quiet down. The distractions grew weaker, the pressure lifted, and there was this profound sense of stillness. What's so amazing here is that the circumstances didn't change at all. The problems were still waiting right outside the door, but God's presence suddenly became greater and much more tangible than the distractions themselves. The author drops this incredibly powerful line: deep prayer often changes how you see things before it changes the things themselves. I mean, wow. The responsibilities hadn't disappeared, but because their perspective shifted, what once seemed completely impossible suddenly looked manageable. What felt totally overwhelming began looking temporary. The circumstances were exactly the same, but the lens through which they were viewed had completely transformed.
Now, what's really interesting about this concept is that as you linger, deep prayer kind of acts like a giant spotlight. Hidden things are suddenly brought to the surface. Your attitudes, fears, unforgiveness, doubts, motives, things we successfully ignore during our busy, loud days suddenly become glaringly visible in the stillness. But the source makes a super important distinction here. This is absolutely not for condemnation. God isn't bringing these things up to make you feel terrible about yourself. He surfaces them for healing. What God reveals, He can restore. And because of that, fear finally begins to lose its grip on you.
Moving on, this quietness naturally triggers a spiritual shift, a move toward real intimacy and the living Word.
As the mental noise quiets down and those hidden things are addressed, The author describes moving from just knowing about God to having this acute, intense awareness of His presence. God stops being a subject you study and becomes a reality you actually experience. And remarkably, as this spiritual shift happens, the Bible stops feeling like this collection of dusty ancient writings and suddenly just comes alive. To understand how this happens, we have to look at how they define revelation. It's when words become more than mere information. They become a profound, living, personal illumination of truth by God's presence. In this state of deep prayer, the source notes that verses you might have read 100 times before suddenly carry fresh, deep meaning. They become deeply personal and relevant. You aren't just reading facts anymore. You're experiencing revelation. God illuminates truths that were literally always right there on the page, but that you just completely overlooked before.
And this brilliantly illustrates the change in what we are actually seeking. We usually start out seeking information. We want answers, explanations, solutions. We want God to explain the why. But as you remain in that presence, that desperate need for answers naturally just falls away, and it's replaced by seeking intimacy. It becomes this desire for relationship, for peace, and for simply knowing the one who knows everything. The author realized that the absolute greatest gift isn't information, it's intimacy.
So what is the ultimate change here? It all comes down to the heart's transformation and awareness.
So many of us enter prayer hoping God will change our circumstances. And sure, often He does. But sometimes, the very first thing God changes is the human heart. Deep prayer softens what has become hard, it heals what's been wounded, it strengthens what has grown weak, and it renews what has become so weary. You don't force it. The simple act of being in God's presence naturally reshapes the heart. The author comes to this profound realization saying, God had been guiding me, teaching me, correcting me, encouraging me all along. People always ask why God doesn't speak to them. But the source suggests the issue isn't that God is giving us the silent treatment, it's that our own lives are entirely too loud. Deep prayer creates the necessary room in your life to finally listen. It sharpens your spiritual awareness so you can see that God was actually always speaking. You were just way too distracted to hear it.
Which leads us to leaving completely changed and this beautiful internal miracle.
This is really the culmination of all that lingering, of letting the noise fade, of experiencing revelation and a completely reshaped heart. The author wraps up their experience by setting up this stark, almost startling contrast between the unchanged external world and their completely transformed internal state. Think about this for a second. The room looked the same. When the author finally opened their eyes, the physical world hadn't shifted an inch. The room is identical, the world outside was exactly the same. The heavy circumstances and all those responsibilities they walked in with, they were all exactly where they left them. Not a single external thing had changed.
But I had changed, so the crucial point here is this internal shift. Inside there was infinitely more peace, more clarity, more faith, and way more confidence. The author left prayer fundamentally different than how they entered. And this just beautifully proves the core message of our source material today. The greatest miracles in prayer aren't always the ones that happen around you. Sometimes the absolute greatest miracle is the transformation that happens within you when you truly spend time in the presence of God.
So, I want to leave you with this provocative question to chew on. Will you stay long enough for the deeper work to begin? Are you willing to just stop rushing? To stop treating prayer like some chaotic daily checklist? Will you linger in the presence, let the noise fade, and actually allow your heart to be transformed? The secret is simply not stopping too soon. If this explainer resonated with you today, maybe your next step is to embrace that stillness and simply ask to be taught how to pray deeper. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey today, and keep exploring,